Hello, everybody. This is the last paper presentation session of Money View Symposium, 6th edition. We have three papers by veteran YSI members, Money View people. The first paper is Money Beyond Exchange, a synthesis by Alex Howlett. The second paper is What is a Dollar by Chris Rimmer. And the third paper is Bitcoin as Money, Mythos, Logos, and Value by Alfredo Hernandez Sanchez. I'm looking forward to all of them. And without any further ado, I'll give the floor to Alex.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jay. So we get to do a session on what is money. It's always my favorite ones. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Hmm. Looks like what I want. Okay. So money beyond exchange, a synthesis. So we're money viewers here. So we all understand money as the means of payment, right? We're thinking of um, the economy as time patterns of cash flows and cash commitments and interlocking balance sheets and all of that. But I think everybody agrees that money is a means of payment. It's what you use to pay people for things. But beyond that, there's a lot of disagreement. Is it a form of credit? Is it a commodity? Is it a medium of exchange, a measure of value, store of value? Is money a legal construct? Is it a market phenomenon? So this talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate that the answer to all of the above questions is yes, and the answer to some other questions is yes as well, and then the answer to other questions is no. Um, so just to kind of situate us in the money view in terms of which part of the money view I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about payments, money as a means of payment. I'm not going to talk about banking. I'm not going to talk about alchemy. I'm not going to talk about hierarchy or instability. There is going to be a sprinkling of hybridity, and there will be some mention of dealers making markets. Okay, so let's see. Oh, there we go. So function versus substance. So I find, so here's Ralph Hawtrey. This is a quote I like from the very beginning of Currency and Credit. Money is one of those concepts which, like a teaspoon or an umbrella, but unlike an earthquake or a buttercup, are definable primarily by the use or purpose which they serve. So that's a functional. He's arguing that we should have a functional definition of money. And then the next sentence after that is he says money is a medium of exchange, which I think money is doing that, but that's not the main thing it's doing, right? It's serving as a means of payment within a context of exchange of underlying commodities or something like that. Um, so there's the material substance kind of definitions of money, right? Like, what is money made of? Is it made of gold or some commodity or something like that? Is it made of promises, right? Like, is the thing itself a promise issued by a bank deposit or something like that? Those are fine. That's fine. I think money can be those things. It can be gold. It can be a bank deposit, that kind of thing. But that's more on kind of like sometimes I like to say the implementation of money, but that implies that money is always designed. It's not always designed. Sometimes you just find a commodity out there on the market and use that as your money. But it's this. I think the substance of money is important, but it's not part of the definition of money. And the substance of money, importantly, has to kind of tie it to the market for goods and services, for commodities. There has to be a stable purchasing power, and that monetary stability has to be either managed somehow, or you're finding something that's stable on the market already anyway, or something like that. So there are constraints on how money can be implemented, right? On what kinds of things can serve as money. So even that's despite the fact that the connection to commodities is irrelevant for the logic of payments. You can do most of the money view stuff without even talking about the real economy or thinking about the real economy. But there has to be a bridge there. Um, so yeah, now I can go to the next slide. Um, so there's this credit theory of money versus commodity theory of money, right? So now that we've talked about the kind of material substance versus the function of money, we can kind of, there's actually two different categories of commodity theory of money. There's money is credit because it claims this is what Henry Dunning MacLeod is saying right here. Money is credit because it claims goods. Credit is anything which is of no direct use, but which is taken in exchange for something else in the belief or confidence that it can be exchanged away again. Not just goods, but claim anything. It could be other, financial instruments or something like that. So that is money as credit in the functional sense. But then there's also this kind of credit theory of money that says money is credit because it's made of promises. It's made of credit. So that's like A. Mitchell Innes. He kind of makes that argument that money is because of its substance is a form of credit. And we talk about that a little bit in the money view. We're imagining that most money is inside money. It's a promise for a higher form of money or something like that. I said I wasn't going to talk about hierarchy. Okay, and then there's the monetary theory of credit, which is also kind of a substance, a material substance. Well, yeah, it is. It's a material substance version of a monetary theory, which is that credit is kind of a superstructure on top of money or something like that. That people were making payments with money and they needed, this is something that actually happens. They need more elasticity, so they create derivative forms of credit. Yes, sure, but that's not what money fundamentally is. That's more of a substance kind of material argument for money. So I mean, it's really true that money is a form of credit, but it can also be made of credit. Money settles debts, but IOUs can also serve as money. All of this stuff is true. The answer is yes, yes, yes. So then, what about money as a commodity in the functional sense? Like, what is a commodity? A commodity is a good that is marketable, right? You can use it to exchange for other things. So it's kind of a good with this credit quality to it, right? It has exchange value. It's taken in exchange for something else, right? And then the more kind of like we talk about money being the highest form of credit. This is what Henry Dunning MacLeod says actually later on. He says money is the highest form of credit in the sense that it's exchangeable for anything. But that's also like the most pure form of commodity. So we could say that money is the highest form of credit at the same time that it's the purest form of commodity because all it has is the commodity side of it. It's so much of a commodity that it has shed any use value, right? It's a pure commodity. So I think, money is credit and money is a commodity, both in the functional sense. And then they can be implemented either on top of other commodities or on top of other forms of credit, in kind of a material substance kind of sense. Okay, so next slide. So here's Perry Mehrling. This quote is really what does it even mean? Credit is a promise to pay money, and money is the highest form of credit. So what does that mean? Does that mean that money is a promise to pay money, that it's entirely circular? And I think Perry's trying to be poetic and clever here and kind of indicate toward that. But we can also break this down in terms of function versus substance. So while credit is a promise, an IOU is a promise to pay, and that's according to MacLeod one kind of credit. But some credit is exchangeable, even though nobody's promising anything, right? Gold would be a form of credit for Henry Dunning MacLeod. It's not perfect credit. It's not the highest best form of money you can have because the best form of money has dropped any use value or anything like that. But gold, when we're using it as money, it's an approximation of kind of the purest form of money, and therefore is kind of a form of credit in the MacLeod sense. Money is the highest form of credit. So that actually comes directly from MacLeod. MacLeod was, I think, the first person to say that. But he doesn't mean hierarchically in terms of like the hierarchy of money and credit that Perry Mehrling talks about. He means in terms of like it's the most marketable, the most exchangeable for anything. People are. It's a structurally different thing. Like we can talk about, order flow imbalances in the economy. They are absorbed, right, through commodity inventories, but mostly the main commodity that people are keeping inventories of is money, right? It's money balances. So money is the only commodity in a sense that everyone holds inventories of, right? We call it running balances or reserves. Everyone is a money dealer. Everyone's kind of making a market in money in terms of goods and services. Maybe not perfectly liquid with respect to any individual goods and service, but kind of like collectively money. You can exchange money for anything. Now, Does that mean that money is just fundamentally a medium of exchange? According to William Stanley Jevons, kind of he believes that. I think it's certainly true that if you have an exchange economy, then money is going to facilitate that, right? Because you have an intermediary good that you can go through, an intermediary commodity. Um, but payments, an exchange economy needs payments, but that's not the only time you need payments, right? We can pay each other, for debt. We can make a payment to make an investment, and like the general equilibrium models try to tell you that, oh, you're just trading a good today for a commodity today for a commodity in the future or something like that. I think there's only so far you can get with this kind of like gymnastics in terms of making everything that's in the economy an exchangeable commodity. I don't think it can really be done. But there are payments in a lot of contexts in the economy, and money is going to be useful there. If you force your model of the economy to be only about the exchange of goods, right, and goods and services, then money, it can kind of be a veil. It can kind of fall out as a medium of exchange if you're assuming perfect liquidity. But it's not just the assumption of perfect liquidity that's the problem. It's the assumption that the only thing your economy doing is exchange, and that's also wrong. If money is a veil, it's only ever going to be a veil over kind of what's in your model. So if your model is exchange, it's going to be a veil over exchange. If your model is, let's go to the next one. Money without markets. So is money a creature of the market, right? Hicks' market theory of money might say so. But then you go to Schumpeter's treatise on money, and he's imagining a socialist economy, a centralized command economy where there's one producer, there's one supplier, and there are a bunch of consumers who are demanding goods and services from the supplier. Is there a market? Right? It's one producer, right? So what is money doing? He calls money a claim ticket. Its function is a claim ticket. It claims the output of the economy. There's no exchange of goods underlying it. There's just, I mean, maybe you could argue that there's an exchange of labor for goods or something like that. That's the exchange or something like that. But, that just makes it more, you don't need that. And there's not a market. There's not a market. You don't need double coincidence of wants or anything like that. It's just, this it's a directional claim economy. You don't need to think about liquidity. You can have it can be in equilibrium if you want. You could have an equilibrium model. Money doesn't have to, be a consequence of there being frictions or disequilibrium or something like that. It's just a rationing token, right? So you can even have like a centrally planned economy with some idea of supply and demand vectors or something like that. Probably not going out into infinity in the future or something like that. But there's one supplier of everything, and he's adjusting his quantities and prices being supplied uh, to the demand, trying to make supply meet demand with his fancy computer or whatever. So that's money. There's a role for money even if you don't have markets. It's payments, right? You still need payments in this system, but there's no market. So is money a creature of the law, right? So here's Knapp, 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 Knapp. Um, so all means by which a payment can be made to the state form a part of the monetary system. On this basis, it is not the issue, but the acceptation, as we call it, which is decisive. State acceptation delimits the monetary system. So, according to Knapp, if a private token is used to buy groceries but can't be used to pay the state, right, or to pay taxes or something like that, it's maybe a valid means of payment, but it falls strictly outside the monetary system. For Knapp, the term money is a legal category, not an economic one, right? And it's certainly not the object of study of the money view, right? So Knapp uses the term money to describe something that is not a general means of payment in the economy. It's a specific interface with the state. And which state? Well, whichever state you're looking at right now. So foreign countries, if they have money within their state, that's not money to you because you're in this legal system over here with your money or something like whatever you accept as taxes. So Knapp is really not talking about the same thing that we're talking about, but maybe he thinks he does because he thinks that if the state accepts a certain thing in its payment offices, I think he calls it, then it will end up being adopted by the market and by everybody else as their standard means of payment, and that's fine. But what if there are multiple Nappian monies, right? Like, how do we reconcile that, right? So, like, let's say that Nap decides to make sand, water, and coffee all things that are accepted as payment by the government, right, in its pay offices, maybe for different things, maybe for they're all substitutes or something like that. So now those are all legal forms of money in the Nappian sense, even if nobody uses them as the general means of payment. And if they did, which one would they choose, right? So we can't really build on NAP by saying that the thing that the state accepts as money will be adopted by the market. It just doesn't logically make sense. But the people who are following this kind of state theory of money, legal theory of money, they notice that the government issued money, the government accepted money is always going to be the same as the market, the money that's being used in the market. Well, why is that? It's because the causation is moving in the opposite direction. The state will choose to use the same payment standard that everyone else is using because it wants to interface with the economy. It wants to be able to talk to the market and all of that. And it's also true that the state is in a powerful position to manage the money. That's fine as well. There's your hybridity, right? The central bank, is going to probably end up working with the state to manage this to manage various things. We don't need to get into that. But okay. So this is the last slide. Money is a natural phenomenon that emerges from the general need to make payments, which is not limited to goods for goods barter exchange, right? And it's not limited to tax payments by the state. It's not limited to investment or any of that stuff. So Menger is not wrong, right? Menger talks about money as a medium of exchange, the most saleable commodity. Money is that, and Jevons is not wrong. Schumpeter is not wrong. Money is used to claim the output of the economy. That's true. Knapp is kind of wrong because what he's talking about isn't even money, right? He's talking about this theoretical thing that doesn't exist, kind of, because the government is going to use what everyone else is using as money. So money is neither a creature of the market nor a creature of the state. Money is a creature of payment. It's a creature of money is used in the market, managed by the state, but it is a natural emergent consequence of the need to make standard payments. And this is me. So this is actually my Substack. I was trying to turn my notes from the MOOC into Substack posts, and I only got so far, but I think you can check it out. It's all Money View stuff. I'll stop my share.
Thanks, Alex. That's really interesting. We have Chris as a discussant. Would you like to come on, Chris? Give your comments.
Okay, yeah, should we go for that now? Yeah, thank you, Alex. It was a good rundown of all the different ideas about what money is. Yeah, I think I agree with your idea that the substance of it is less important than its use because there are so many different substances that have been used as money. I was wondering about the thing that I've heard several times before, I always find very confusing, is this idea that all money is credit. And I find that very odd with it just seems to go completely against the what seems to me to be the definition of credit, which is a debt. So it's one person's asset and another person's liability. So there's apparently a quote from Keynes saying that I think he was talking about a silver rupee or something is credit stamped on a silver coin or something. But I don't see how that can be anybody else's debt. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so for McLeod, I mean, he's defining credit differently than probably what you're used to. So maybe I didn't emphasize that enough. But for him, credit is not necessarily a debt. It can be a debt, but it doesn't have to be anyone's liability, right? It just has to, its value has to come from what it can be exchanged for. That's what he means by credit. And I think even at his time, he's kind of like twisting the definition to kind of suit his needs. But he's also the origin of, money is the highest form of credit, right? That comes from him. And the credit theory of money, I think Thornton also. Yeah, and I think, like maybe you can object to that if you want. And you're like, well, you're using the word credit in a way that is not right. And maybe I should be using a different word there. But I think the concept is right, right? That money is fundamentally kind of the thing that can be exchanged for anything. Well, not just that, but it can be used to make any payment. And in the context of the exchange part of the economy, it can be exchanged for anything. But it can also be like, okay, so you can think of money as being like an intermediary between two commodities, or you can think of the money itself as a commodity, right? So even in Schumpeter's world where money is a claim ticket, money itself is kind of a commodity that you're exchanging for something else. So depending on where you want to draw various definitional lines, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Do you know was Knapp a chartalist?
Knapp invented chartalism.
Did he?
He
Okay,
he is the chartalist. Yeah. And
right.
then Mitchell Innes is probably in that category too, and I think he's also kind of wrong. And then later on Schumpeter and uh, uh, Charles Goodhart talk about kind of metalism versus chartalism. But it's not like that dichotomy is not like necessary. You don't have to choose one or the other necessarily. And it's not necessarily that either one is the right choice, right? It's that money is the standard means of payment, and it can be made of money. It can be made of commodities. It could be made of promises. But its function is to be the standard means of payment. Yeah, standard debt settlement instrument, you could say. Um, Marx had an interesting distinction between means of purchase and means of payment, where if you're buying something right now in a spot transaction, it's a means of purchase. But if you are buying something kind of on credit and promising to pay later, then it becomes a means of payment. So sometimes you see that distinction. It's weird.
Okay. Yeah. I think
Great.
that's
Should we, Chris, do you have more comments, or should we open it up to others to come in?
let's open it up.
Mr. Perry has something to say.
Yeah. So yes, McLeod. McLeod. So you've read McLeod. So nobody reads McLeod. I've read McLeod. And you're quite right that was very influential to me. And I think it's probably true that I'm ripping him off by saying that quote. Where did you even get that quote? I don't really know where. It sounds like me, but I don't know where it's from.
I think it's from one of the lectures.
Yeah,
I
okay.
can find it. Uh,
Well, so you said you weren't going to talk about hierarchy. Okay. But I think you need hierarchy because all your different conceptions of money, they're these are par relations, right? So the par is key. It's a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy at par. So the that's all the different forms of money, are playing different roles, but they are exchangeable for each other. And at par, that's the secret. And that's hybridity. That's all of that. So
So Perry, I'm gonna interrupt you. I
yeah,
agree that
that's
hierarchy is
the end.
important. It's just not what I'm talking about in
All
this
right, all right,
particular talk. Okay.
all right.
So I'm trying to connect, as you can tell, I'm trying to connect them. I'm trying to do the fourth price of money here. Where does it come in? All of the logic of payments and everything that can exist without the fourth price of money. That's part of the function, the payments function of money. The fourth price of money actually has to do with the substance of money. So Chris said maybe the substance is not as important or something like that. Well, it's not part of the definition of money. But it is important in terms of stabilizing the purchasing power of money with respect to commodities.
Okay.
Carl is also willing to jump in. Let's hear Carl.
Okay. Hi, Alex. So what you actually just said is different than what I was getting from what I was hearing. So let me just give sort of a narrative of what I was hearing from you. And using Innes, you have the substance and function split. And Innes, for instance, talks about money. It sounds like you're saying Innes thinks that money is in its substance essentially a promise. First question, why couldn't he be thinking in functional terms? Or why couldn't we think money is functionally a promise? All right, number one. But you're okay, Innes thinks that money is substantially a promise. It's not that. So what? What's the implication? It seems like money has no substance, or it can take any substance, and so that's less important. Um, but it has an essential function, or it has multiple essential functions. It sounds like you're saying, look, it's essentially we should focus on function. Essentially, its essential function is payment. We should be less hung up on its essential substance. So that's the second. Like, is that a correct sort of like route for your argument?
No, and I think Chris got that kind of impression as well. I
Okay.
think the substance and the function are both important. The function is definitional in terms of the essence of money is its function. Its substance is important, and it can't just be anything, right? And in practice, it's gonna usually be it's gonna be implemented in terms of an IOU, some liability that's issued by a bank, right? And that's all of that is important. We understand all of that, and we understand why that is. But the yeah, so the substance of money is important, and then the substance of money is also important for kind of its anchor to the price level, right? The connection to the price level. Like if you're just looking at payments, then not only do you not see hierarchy, but you don't see the price level either.
I see. Ruslan, you had a couple of comments. Why don't you come in on the chat and you have your hand up?
His hand might be left over. I'm not sure. Oh, there he
If
is.
yeah, if I may, just to share some thoughts about this. Thank you so much. It was very interesting about what is money, because this is really interesting question. I would like to suggest, and maybe or at your discussion, that to distance the economic definition of money. So what it is, what money, which problem money solves. And in my view, at your discretion, money solves two problems: is measurement. So they introduce the unit of measurement of something, maybe commercial relationships. I don't know, maybe. And the second, to have prices. So after you have money, as a result of having money, you have prices. And the second is transactions. They're interlinked. So this is economic definition. It's like math. It's only theoretical. But when you come to real life, you need to, in real life, it's not like something which, theory cannot live only in theory. You come to real life. And in real life, you need something to use as a money. And when you come to, and then people design something and look for something which could be used as money. And they try to find, so for example, they can start to use metals, what they have in possession. This is just a commodity, but they coin it, they start to make it, standardize it, to make purity and make weight, standardize it, to make what? To make transactions as useful as possible and to measurement as useful as possible. And this is one way. This is private money. This is commodity money. But this is a form which linked to theory. It's not ideal, but it's and it's always developed. We look at the silver. We started from people first appeared that silver is good as a mean of exchange. Then they found that we need a measurement. They started from weight. For example, shekel was one of the first measurements, the most ancient measurement. Then they go to the form, with Greeks started to coin them with the hammer, or in India from India's. I don't know who is the first one, who was the first. Then they start the purity. There we got the sterling. Sterling silver with more or less equal silver, around 94, 91%. Then we got the form, diameter of thaler. And then this is then we get a dollar, which was American thaler, and after the peso, etc. So this was development of commodity money, and they are not private. You can in United States, they used, as far as I remember, as I understand, they used multiple dollars, and pesos before they did not have. In Virginia, they were for 150 years. They have tobacco as a national currency, the pound of tobacco. All the taxes and salaries and budgets were in tobacco, pound. So actually, so this was international. Silver was international money system when commodity was the function of money was embedded into commodity. We accept them. And when this national state appeared, they started to design their own money and say, okay, we will have legal tender, and they design it, a construction, set of laws, set of relationships, and as banks, for example, etc., or payment, which was to design, let's say, paper money, or then first of be legal, be metal system, different type of system to make national money. And they play with that. So it also was, and then we will have a different theories of money: commodity theory of money and national theory. Or you understand state theory of money. So, but all of them, this is not about essence of money. This is already the design. What will happen if we will use the state form of money, and what the consequences, what the laws, what will happen if we use gold? What will happen? This is just in formal investigation. What will happen if we will this kind of form? The next form will be most probably digital, because nobody can understand what is behind Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is just a register, which could be used as a clearing system. And so this is the first idea, is just try to differentiate the essence of money, which is settlement and prices. And it's with the form, when the forms appear, you have a theories of this which relates and studies this form of money. And of course, they cannot, the form that studies national form of money cannot explain the gold form of money, for example, commodity form of money, because there are different rules there, a bit different rules, different hierarchy. And the third, what I would like to notion, this is trust. Any monetary system, whichever you want, commodity or digital or state, works only if you have trust. When everybody, like a religion, believes, it's like a metaphysical form, that when we settle, we are done. I mean, if I give you a coin, gold coin, you think that my debt or my obligation to you, to, for example, for goods or services, for a debt, is done. This is the key thing in settlement, because otherwise there is no settlement, and it is trust that I received and I'm satisfied. This is very obvious, but this is very important, because you cannot satisfy me if you came to me with the silver coin, which I don't accept, because I don't need, even if it's silver. So this is you will not have you will not accept my payment in hryvnia, it's local currency of Ukraine, or Mongolian tugrik. I mean, this settlement, even though this is money in some countries. So this is, but we need to understand that trust. The key thing is everybody, money appears when everybody trusts in this money. Otherwise, this is not money. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I basically agree with most of what you're just saying. I just want to point out one thing, which is that you're talking about the money solving two problems, measurement, prices, and transactions. Instead of transactions, I would say payments there, right? When we talk about money in the context of transactions, we can say, like, is money intermediating some underlying transaction of commodities or something like that, or underlying transaction of assets, or that, or is the money itself part of the transaction? And I think when you're talking about payment alone, then you can think of money itself as part of the transaction. So it's not wrong to say transaction if the money is part of the transaction, but sometimes the money is not intermediating an underlying transaction. It is the transaction itself. It's paying for something.
Agree on that.
Great. Well, we're not sticking to a schedule, but I think we've exhausted the first time for the first part of the presentation. That's Alex. So we move on to Chris now. Would you like to give your presentation? Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you. Just going to share my screen. There we go. And oops, fire it up. Right, so here we go. Thanks for having me back. Third time I've presented now at the Money View. For anyone who hasn't seen me before, I tend to specialize in foundations of economic theory with a particular emphasis on balance sheets. When the call came through for papers, I was thinking that economists can't seem to agree on what money is. So I thought now's the time to address it. So when people think of a dollar, I think most people are thinking about this. And in everyday use, it's fine to call that a dollar, but that's not really what it is. It's actually a $1 Federal Reserve note. So that means it's an IOU for a dollar. And the question is, what is that dollar? Now, if I was giving this talk in 1933, I could cut short this presentation at this point by saying a dollar is 25 8/10 grains of gold, which is 9/10 fine. I was looking at the 1900 Gold Standard Act. From my reading of the Act, it seems like a lump or a ring of 25.8 grains of 90% gold wasn't just worth a dollar. It actually was, by definition, a dollar, just as much as a coin of the same weight with $1 stamped on it. But a 90% gold coin which didn't weigh 25.8 grains wasn't a dollar, even if it did have $1 stamped on it. So the point there is that a dollar isn't what's labeled as a dollar. It's a specific quantity. Back in those days, back in 1933, let's say, it was a specific quantity of a specific purity of gold. And then in 1934, it was redefined to be, 1/35 of an ounce of gold, which was a 40% decrease. So yes. So in 1971, the connection between dollars and a quantity of silver or gold was permanently severed. So nowadays, there is no dollar. There's no physical dollar anyway. But the spoon from the Matrix is quite a useful analogy for the modern dollar. Even though there isn't a physical dollar, it still has properties, and you can use those to understand what a modern dollar is. So to find out what those properties are, you have to do a bit of lateral thinking. So you can, instead of just seeing what you get in exchange for a dollar bill, look at the variety of possible ways that you can settle any dollar-denominated IOU. So the Federal Reserve note is still, these days, an IOU for a number of dollars. But if you present a $1 Federal Reserve note to the Fed for payment, then they'll probably get security to eject you. And even if they do let you in, the best you can expect is to get it replaced with a fresh new $1 Federal Reserve note. That makes it look like a modern dollar is a Federal Reserve note because that's what you get back for it. But that would make it an IOU for itself. And circular definitions aren't nice. But there is an alternative. So this isn't really settlement. If you create a new IOU to replace the one that was just discharged, then you're just back where you started. So for real settlement, the debtor's liabilities have to decrease. It has to be a deleveraging. So there are actually 4 ways to settle a dollar-denominated debt. The first one is direct. Second one is alternative payment. Third one is with a better IOU. And fourth one is netting. So let's have a look at each one. and see what properties a dollar must have for this method to work, both in 1933 and today. So direct settlement, here we have the creditor on the left discharges the debt, so she loses the asset, and Bob on the right loses the liability. That's the top arrow, and the bottom arrow shows a transfer of a tangible asset, in this case gold coins. And this is straightforward, as long as the debtor has the coins or can exchange something for them at short notice. But today that's not possible. It's not possible to settle directly because there is no physical dollar. So the properties you need to settle in this way, you need a dollar that exists in a physical form. That could be done in 1933, but can't be done today. Well, it's an alternative payment. So instead of handing over physical dollars, the debtor and creditor could agree on the transfer of something else. So here's a baker who's bought flour for $5 on credit from a miller, and settles it by giving loaves of bread to the miller, as long as the miller agrees to it. Now, all you need for this is for the debtor and the creditor to agree on a value of $5 in terms of loaves of bread or whatever they transfer. And that worked in 1933, and it still works today. You can still settle a debt that way. Better IOU. So this is getting into money view ideas, the hierarchy. So we have the debtor on the right, but this time, instead of handing over something tangible, he's handing over a third-party IOU, so a better IOU. It could be, you could be writing a check in this case, which transfers deposits to the miller. And so it's an exchange of $5 for $5 in terms of nobody's, if you're looking at what I call the raw net worth, not the current value, but just the nominal, then it's an exchange of $5 for $5. So the properties you need from a dollar to settle a debt in this way are none at all. It doesn't matter what a dollar is; it doesn't have to exist, because you're simply exchanging $5 for $5. And again, that worked in 1933, and it still works today. And finally, netting, which is how you would. It's done in a number of situations, but very commonly when you repay a loan. So this is undoing the initial swap of IOUs. So both parties are losing an asset and losing a liability. So again, because it's $5 for $5, then there's no properties assumed about the what a dollar is. And again, that worked in 1933, and it still works today. So if you look at this, the two columns on the right, the only type of settlement which doesn't work today, which worked in the past, is a direct settlement. Everything else still carries on as before. So the system just continues, even though we don't have a dollar defined as a specific quantity of something tangible. So you do need a dollar. You do need a dollar to have a value for at least alternative payments, and also when the dollars circulate around the economy. And people get their idea of the value of a dollar from their own previous trades in the past, current market activity or past market activity, so other people's bids, asks, and agreed prices. And also another one I thought of was expectations about inflation. So how should we think of a dollar now? It's quite abstract to think of a value in isolation. So if you find that hard to imagine, then maybe you could picture a dollar as a certain quantity of an inaccessible substance, like this is 1 ounce of unobtainium. But if you're happy with abstraction, then you could think of it as more like a sort of Platonic archetype or something, where it's it's just a concept which has a value associated with it. Oh, I didn't start my timer. Can you tell me how long I've got left, please?
I would say 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, right. Let's just do this quickly then. So, how do you use an abstract currency? So even well, here are ways you can use a traditional currency. You can transfer something tangible. You can write a new IOU. You can transfer an existing IOU. You can accept somebody else's liability, or you can write off their debt to you. Those were all traditional ways. Nowadays, that one's not possible, but all 4 others are still available. So you can still pay dollars just as easily as you could in the past. If you don't have a dollar, you write a new IOU. So I just want to do a quick look at an example starting from scratch. So 4 people have got things that they each has one thing. They want something that one of the others has got. So here is how it works. And we're going to see that you don't need any form of tangible dollar. So Alice is swapping IOUs with a bank. And then she's going to buy a book from Bob, passing on the $10 deposit, which is so it was owed by the bank to Alice. Now it's owed by the bank to Bob. Next step is Bob passes that deposit on to Charlotte in exchange for a cake. Charlotte passes it on to Dom in exchange for a DVD. Dom passes it back to Alice in exchange for some amber, and then you undo the original creation of the original swap of IOUs by the mutual discharge of debts, the set off, the netting. And I just want to quickly mention at this point, because when the Marxists talk about circuits like CMC and MCM prime, I think like Crocodile Dundee. That's not a circuit. This is a circuit. So that shows the deposit from creation, round the loop, and then back to destruction again, which undoes any effects it has on everybody's balance sheet. Everybody's left as a result of those actions exactly where they were to start with, as a result of those actions. Obviously, there are other actions which have taken place as well. There's also another circuit here, which is the loan, which is a much shorter circuit. It's created by Alice and then discharged by the bank. And all that's left is the transfer of tangible assets, of goods. So to summarize, even though there's no longer anything higher than a Federal Reserve note or other reserves in the hierarchy of money, that doesn't mean that the Federal Reserve note is a dollar. It just means that IOUs for a dollar have to be settled using a different method from the direct one, and they're generally settled by netting. So if we think of a dollar today as an unobtainable object where people can agree on its value at a point in time, we don't really need to change our understanding of how the economy works compared to the gold standard. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We have Alfredo discussing. Alfredo, you want to give your comments now?
Yeah,
Thank you.
let's go ahead. Thank you, Chris. It was a very interesting presentation, and I also had a chance to look at the paper. I saw that it was written in LaTeX, so I was immediately convinced by it. Also, that you're presenting with Linux, so that's like, there's no way that any of this is wrong. But now, no more seriously. I think there's a lot of very interesting ideas that can really benefit from contextualizing. And I think that it's so great to have you in the same panel with Alex, because a lot of the things that Alex talked about, well, okay, so is money, where does money fall or say, how is our understanding of money as either a commodity or as a form of credit actually manifests when we try to model it empirically, which is, or create some type of formal model, which is my understanding of the goal that you're having with this paper, right? And also, one thing that I found very interesting is this. I'm not sure that you went too deep in it in the presentation, but it was a bit clear in the paper on the jump in 1971 from the old dollar gold system to the lack of anchor, right? So I think that expanding a bit on this and contextualizing it would also help you like strengthen the arguments that you're outlining here. And to something a bit more specific, there was an idea that I liked very much, which is, but I liked it, but it wasn't necessarily clear. So I don't know if you could expand on it now. It's the circular idea of the dollar being an IOU for itself. It sounds very nice. It strikes a chord, but if you could maybe go a bit deeper into what you had in mind with this. And on my side, that's everything.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a formal model. My background is in mathematical modeling, so I've been doing object-oriented analysis and design for over 30 years now. So a lot of that is about stocks and flows, and it's about identifying concepts which make sense and which work. So that's what I've been trying to do. The bit about the anchor, yes, I ran out of time. I was hoping to put something in here, but I just skipped over it because I didn't have enough time left. The circular IOU, the IOU for itself, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think is a nice way to think about it. I think if you define something as an IOU for itself, then you can't really do very much with that, I think. And so I think it's the idea here is to show that if we separate out the concept of a dollar from IOUs for a dollar, then everything fits together better, and it actually is. It works in a way just like the gold standard, with the sort of exception of the. I mean, there's liquidity differences, and that doesn't tend to be my focus. I'm always after what we can know for certain, absolute certain with, and I can't remember what the other. There's one more thing I was going to say, but yeah, that's the idea. Thank you.
Okay, Chris. So I'm curious, what do you think about the idea that gold was chosen as money, partly for its stable price, and that later forms of money were pegged to gold as a device for enforcing monetary stability? So the stable purchasing power of money. So you stabilize the purchasing power of money by pegging it to gold. And now, in your diagram, you have gold at the top, and then we've kind of removed the top, right? But what if the top is commodities, right? And instead of removing the top of the hierarchy, you've removed an intermediate layer in the hierarchy. So you're bypassing gold and stabilizing the purchasing power of the money directly against a basket of commodities. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what a dollar is, so there is no tangible dollar, but you have IOUs for dollars. Well, they are explicitly IOUs for dollars. So you certainly can settle using any commodity you like. That was my point about the alternative payments. That was a sort of second approach to settlement. But there's that you actually get a kind of liquidity issue there. Let me just.
Yeah, so another way of getting at this issue is we can ask, does the monetary standard have to be a form of money itself? Does it have to be a liquid thing that's normal to use to make payments?
I don't think it has to be at all. No, I think you can use whatever people are happy to accept. Um, yeah. Have you ever considered the idea that that if you have $1,000 but you owe, I don't know, half an ounce of gold, then you actually have a liquidity problem in the opposite direction from normal.
Yeah, you have a liquidity problem in terms of whatever your liabilities are
Yeah.
denominated in. Yeah. And that's true. That shows up even more commonly in like, collateral and financial markets and stuff like that. There's like a survival constraint
Oh,
on the
yeah.
collateral side of repo as well as the money side kind of thing.
All the puts on Porsche in 2008 or something, I think. Yeah. Have I answered the question to your satisfaction? Or...
Well, yes, but I have just kind of one more thought, which is that you do talk a lot about kind of the, kind of what I was talking about as the substance of money. Do you feel that the substance of money is important beyond its function of ensuring monetary stability?
That's actually a question that I don't really take a strong stance on. If people want to use it, then I can tell you something about what the effects of that will be. But um, I'm happy for people to go off using Bitcoin. I wouldn't personally. Uh, I'm skeptical myself uh, because it seems to me that it's an asset which doesn't have a corresponding liability anywhere else. So that, as I said in the comments, the last holder of any given Satoshi has nothing to show for it. But that doesn't mean it's inherently bad necessarily. As long as people understand what they're getting into, maybe. I mean, I guess that's fine.
Well, great. Thank you, Chris. We go to the very last presentation of the day. Alfredo, I hope you feel last but not least.
It's always both good and bad to be last, right? Because I have, I think, a responsibility to be brief or good, but since I cannot promise good, I will be brief.
Take your time.
No worries. Just
We're
let me
not
know
there.
if you can
Discipline is
see.
suspended.
Don't
Yeah, we can see
worry.
it fine. All good.
Okay, okay. Let me just put this down. I don't think I can go full screen, so I'm just going to go like this. All right. So, there we go. Okay. So, first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Alfredo Hernandez. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Vilnius on a research project on fintech. This is a bit of a side project unrelated to that. And what I want to talk about today is, as Alex did and as Chris did, on very much on topic, on the problem of the nature of money. What is money? And I'm very happy to go last because that means that Alex took the brunt of a lot of the things I wanted to explain or to address about commodity versus credit. So I'm just going to jump into the more substantial parts of the argument, and I'm going to put the timer on now. So the big question here is, can we consider Bitcoin money? And the more important, the more interesting question is, if so, why yes and why no? And this is, I think that the debate on the moneyness of cryptocurrencies really goes to show us the fault lines that we have on debates on money overall. And what I would like to show throughout this presentation is that these debates have taken pretty much the same form for quite a very long time. And in light of this, I would like to make a very small proposal on how, first of all, modest explanation of why this may be, and hopefully a proposal on how we can pull away from this, let's say, these locked horn state of affairs. So here we have a very recent article. Okay, crypto is pointless. It's not backed by anything. It has no intrinsic value. And then beside us, we have this commenter, random commenter. Well, if Bitcoin is a pointless asset class, then so is gold, right? And this goes to what I argue is one of the things that monetary theory has neglected, which is the dimension of value. Now, I think that the presentations we've had so far make this slide a bit unnecessary, but it's one of my favorite quotes, so I'm gonna requote it anyway. And it goes something like this: It's Marx misquoting Gladstone, saying misquoting because he never said this. He said, "Not even love has made so many fools of men as the pondering over the nature of money." And this is something that scholars have been tempted to do for a very long time, and not just in modernity, but as will show in a bit, well before this. But what I find interesting about this particular quote is that immediately after Marx says this, he says, well, all of these mysteries about money are resolved once we finally accept it as a commodity. And this idea of, okay, well, money is a commodity has a very long intellectual history, which I'm sure many of us are already aware of, but we can trace it back all the way to the Middle Ages, arguably to a distinction that Aristotle makes in the fifth book of the Nicomachean Ethics. And throughout the 19th century, the idea that money was a special commodity was essentially gospel. It is one of the few things that Menger, Marx, pretty much everyone, even to a certain extent Simmel, but Simmel I'll come back to in a bit, agreed on. Well, money is a commodity. It wasn't until the early 20th century with Innes where he said, well, if we actually look at the evidence, we see that money's birth, money's origin is not in this so-called barter myth, which is one of the persistent myths, the double coincidence of wants, etc., that basically we took for granted until about Innes. He said, well, we don't have any historical evidence that there was this pre-barter society. And as for all of you that have read Graeber, which I'm sure is the vast majority of you, we see that even today we don't find this barter society anywhere in history, right? So we have a lot of evidence that this key element in the myth, the neoclassical myth on where money came from, is, well, unsupported by evidence, and yet it continues to shape our current debates on what money is, and consequently, going back to Bitcoin, well, is Bitcoin money or not? So I'm going to put some highlights on the current literature on the moneyness of Bitcoin, particularly in political economy. So we have a very, let's say, the most famous paper here, which is by Rota and Paranaga, who call it a digital commodity that requires no direct living labor and therefore creates no new value. Schwartz, again, an anthropologist, he dubs it digital gold that is mined rather than minted, a form of commodity. And Hayes calls it essentially a digital collectible or commodity that at its inception didn't have the pretension to be money, right? Now, this, we start seeing a little bit of the fault lines, right? So if Bitcoin is a form of money and money is essentially a special commodity, where does Bitcoin, can we make a claim to Bitcoin's moneyness on substance? Going back to what Alex said. I want to leave this question a little bit open and then jump into the functions, because when we think about money, we think about the tripartite definition. Aristotle's, which again, we trace back all the way to the fifth book by Aristotle, which is that money is a unit of account, a medium of exchange, all good so far. And I think more controversially here is it is a store of value. And this is the point I want to zoom into, because as we have seen before with Alex's paper, the literature is structured around this dichotomy with, okay, well, is it a commodity? Is it credit? What is its true quote unquote nature? And in doing so, my argument here is that we've already gone a bit through this, is that it by in this dichotomy, people on one or scholars on one side or the other of the dichotomy, the commodity credit dichotomy, tend to privilege one of these three functions. For commodity based scholars, they tend to privilege the medium of exchange dimension of money. Ultimately, money is something that is meant to facilitate exchange. And this is the strand with the longest intellectual history. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit. I'm promising a lot here. And the second one, which is the intellectual world that we can trace to Innes or around the beginning of the 20th century, around the time as well as Knapp independently came up with the credit theory of money. But on this particular subject, of course, there are many nuances. They were pretty much in agreement that no, well, money is more about credit, and its central function is not the medium of exchange, but rather its unit of account function. And this is where we get to the known and loved dichotomy of, well, is money a creature of the market or is it a creature of the state? And this becomes important because, as we'll see in a bit, there have been mythologies that have been constructed on these assumptions, and this mythological thinking is part, first of all, the thing that they both share, both the chartalists or the metalists, however you want to call them, is that they both tend to ignore the third dimension of money, which is value. And here I'd like to go back to this thing I said earlier about, well, money's a store of value, as if value were some form of proverbial liquid and money is its bucket. Now, this makes, I'm not going to go too deeply into this because we don't have time and I have 8 minutes left. But it's been long recognized that value has been a very neglected dimension, that economic value has been under-theorized by monetary scholars. There's three main theories of value. Value as substance, so the labor theory of value that says, well, economic value is something that is crystallized in the object, which is crystallized what? Specifically labor. Or field theories of value, for example, utility, where it says, well, it's more about the shared rational relationship that people make up regards to objects and institutional norms of value. However, all of these things, they tend to center around their own particular metaphor. And not only do they do this, but they also undercut the others. So we're thinking, well, even though we know that it's not such in practice, the way that the literature is structured, we tend to structure it as, well, money is either this object, this commodity, that is where value is some form of unknown substance, or it is this field of relationships. It behaves not as an object, but as a contract. And I like to think about this as the understanding of light as a particle or a wave. Now, we can arguably say, and according to Graziani's reading of Marx, he said, well, there are some cases in which scholars have seen, specifically Marx has seen it as being both a credit and a contract, an object and a contract, depending on the circumstance, right? But what they do share is that value, whatever this is, whatever is being stored, is neglected here. And I think that this is problematic, going back to Bitcoin. Well, what gives Bitcoin its moneyness? Because if we think, well, it's a terrible unit of account. No one's actually thinking about things in terms of priced as Bitcoin. It's not a good medium of exchange. Very little actual transactions happen with Bitcoin. And if we think about it in terms of a store of value, it's also not an excellent store of value because of this well-known volatility. However, I think that but if we think about the moneyness of Bitcoin, what is its case for it? It is precisely because it is not necessarily a store of value, but it is a symbol of value. We understand, or we have users of Bitcoin have accepted that there is some value behind this. Now, the connection that I'm trying to make here with Bitcoin and its value is that the value of Bitcoin can, at least in part, be traced back to its original inception. And here I want to make a very quick detour back into this barter myth of money and the one that gets regurgitated throughout the ages. The earliest form that I can find it stated out was in 1355 with Nicolas Rem. And here we can recognize a lot of the things that we still talk about today, right? Well, first there was trade, there was barter, but because barter was inconvenient, people decided to come up with money in order to exchange these natural riches that were divided across the world unevenly by the Most High. Here, in the Middle Ages, in the late Middle Ages, the problem of value was not necessarily a problem. It was understood that it was embedded in this metaphysical system, particularly in the metaphysical system of Christianity. But it only becomes a problem when we jump into modernity, because modernity wants to push away from it. It understands itself as bringing knowledge that is not grounded in myth, which is a very laudable thing. And of course, the modern world that we have is built on this. But in pulling away from myth, or this type of symbolic understanding and the human drive for a metaphysical normative understanding of the world, my argument here is that it complicates our understanding of value, of economic value, because it requires us to think, because value is a story, it's a myth, it's a mythic story, it's embedded in a mythic story. That is, to borrow a metaphor from Jonathan Haidt, the audience is not the rationality of humans, but it's actually our, let's say, subconscious. Again, the metaphor that he uses is it's a story not for the riders that are small, but for the elephants that are very large. And going back to Bitcoin here, so I don't go on too much. Well, what is the mythos of Bitcoin and what makes it different from other currencies? And arguably, what can give us a clue into the value of Bitcoin? And here I'm drawing from this text by Faustino et al. And well, how did Bitcoin come about? It was a text, the white paper, nailed by a mythic unknown hero, who is Satoshi Nakamoto at the end of the day, embedded in the language of metaphysical myth. The first block was called the Genesis block. It had a big sacrifice. 5% of Bitcoin is frozen. It has its own festive calendar. And I think the more important part here is the mysteriousness of this Satoshi Nakamoto figure. Because at the end of the day, when we think about, well, okay, as we saw in the beginning, well, Bitcoin is just a scam, it complicates this question because we are forced to think, well, who is the scammer, right? And if we knew for a fact that it was X, Y, or Z person, then the project becomes subject to our assessment, to our normative judgment of this person. By enveloping this project in myth, it takes away from it. And it also, I argue, speaks a different script. It tries to convince people to rationally adhere to using Bitcoin and the benefits of this protocol, but it is also, and perhaps subconsciously, appealing to the part of our humanity that needs these metaphysical systems and is drawn to it. And that is a part that, in its attempts to mimic physics and the hard sciences, economics has neglected this symbolic thinking. And I think with that, I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfredo. Very interesting. I'll hand it over to Alex to discuss.
Well, my favorite part is your description of the mythos of Bitcoin and all of the just the mythology around it, which I think is kind of interesting. Um, so I suppose my question to you is, um, does Bitcoin have moneyness now? Um, what would it take for Bitcoin to become money?
I think that it is money but it doesn't necessarily need to be good money. And this is one of the quotes by Knapp. I think I went a bit too fast here. It was a bit overly ambitious to put everything there. But he said, well, he talks about paper money. And he says, well, even understanding more about a perverted, dangerous type of money tells us about the nature of the thing. And I think that we can apply the same thing to Bitcoin. Is it fantastic money? No. Is its price in dollars going to go to zero someday soon? Potentially. But can we say categorically, well, no, this is not money because it has no intrinsic value, it is not tied to anything? I don't think so, because the value, it forces us, first of all, to reflect on, well, what is value, right? If we talk about intrinsic value. And I think that that's something that we're not necessarily prepared to do in like economic thinking most of the time. But more importantly, it does have value for quite a big number of people. Whether it is a scam or not, it may end up being true. But today, just look at what you can get from Bitcoin. What would you prefer? I ask you. If I gave you a briefcase full of Kyrgyz Som or a USB drive with the same equivalent in Bitcoin to you in the United States, what would you prefer to get?
I'd prefer the Bitcoin and then I'd immediately sell it. So my question is, okay, so there are plenty of things that have value that aren't money, right? Bitcoin has value, at least in the sense that it has a price, and I'm fine with that. In the sense, gold has value in the sense that it has a price. I mean, would you say that gold is a form of money today, or it was only a form of money when it was being used as money, as a pricing and payment standard? Um,
So, and here I didn't get a chance into
yeah.
going into the definition of money, or at least the definition that I'm thinking about. But what I'm using as money as the definition of money here is taken from the Dodd-Simmel tradition, which again we can make the argument that it's the same thing Schumpeter is saying. But I think that it's fair to call it the Simmel tradition because it's the first time that it was formulated in this sense, right? And it is a claim on society, specifically a claim on, well, an impersonal claim. And what does this require for it to be well, it requires some form of society that has a shared understanding. This particular concept, abstraction, thing, paper is going to be something in which we bestow upon it a symbol, or we recognize it as a symbol of value. And what value is and how it plays a role in humanity's, understanding. That's another discussion, right? But back to your question, if there is some place where gold is being used in this way, then yes, it is. It is definitely a form of money, just like the rice stones in Polynesia.
Okay, so anything that is an impersonal claim within a social system is a form of money.
Yeah,
Full
I
stop.
would say that
Okay.
too.
All right.
Great. I see Mohammed Falah. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you, James. Two questions to Alfredo. First, on the concept, some economists view that money is memory, right? The paper by Kotzel and Kota in the 90s. I know Perry doesn't agree with this, he said so in one of his presentation. But firstly, what's your view on that? And secondly, for Bitcoin, As you know, the Bitcoin ledgers records doesn't record balances, records transactions. So it's very much similar to the theory by Kakula. And secondly is on the appreciate following the Campbell dot tradition on money as a claim on society and personnel. That doesn't seem to be consistent with the various forms of money that we have today. It is personal. The claim on equal deposits, central bank reserve. Uh, it seems to me that human tradition assume money without a hierarchy. Uh, and that makes sense. That's my two questions. Thanks.
Perfect. I'll try. I hopefully this goes into it, and I don't think that like, the claim on society aspect is the gospel of what money is, but I think it's illustrative because it doesn't force or it tries to make as little use of metaphor as possible. And that's the whole point that I'm going with here. Well, if we define money as a commodity or as a contract, or we imply that it is a commodity or a contract, then that typically constrains what we're looking at, right? For example, if money is an object or it's an object-like thing, it has this metaphor has consequences upstream. We're assuming that, well, it was an object that either was that where its movements are what makes its moneyness. Therefore, if it's not moving in a particular way, or that its emergence is what makes it money, it came either top down or bottom up. So therefore, something that is imposed by the state cannot be money, right? And this is the when the paper notes that are created by the state that aren't really an object, it's not backed by anything. Well, that cannot be money. The same thing if we look at it from its mirror opposite, which is, well, no, money is a form of contract. And if we think about, well, money is a form of contract and nothing else, that's equally constraining. So the reason why I like the definition of a claim on society is that it makes, in my opinion, fewer assumptions. But I think the crucial part here is that it is an impersonal claim. And because it is impersonal, it's not necessarily tied to, for example, if you and I transact something, we don't need to know each other. I need to know very little about you, your background, your trustworthiness. All I need to know is all we or and you of me. We simply need to adhere to the same system of value. We have this object that we can physically or socially, maybe not physically, but socially transact to each other. You can transact this later to Alex without him knowing even where it came from or anything about the two of us. And this is all that this requires is that the three of us and the whole system upon which this thing is going to operate agree, so to speak, that this is money. I don't want to say agree because I don't think this is something that we subscribe to logically. It's something that operates at the level of symbol. It's the sensual, not necessarily the rational. But modern social sciences in modernity, the whole echoes of the 19th century, wants us, first of all, to think about every social construct in, okay, this is this specific thing and nothing else. We want to reduce it, not to think holistically. It cannot be both credit and commodity, or at least it discourages it. But also it limits the legitimate knowledge on, well, the thing, money cannot be this thing that is intuitive and non-rational because that is not the purview of science. That is the purview of what is not science, of myth. And I think that if we don't at least recognize that mythologies do play a role in our understanding of value, we are constraining ourselves. We're putting blinders on ourselves, theoretical blinders, and the evidence is that the same arguments that we're having about money today is the arguments that we've been having about money since the 1350s, and if not the same, very similar ones.
So I just have one more question, which is it useful to distinguish between the standard impersonal claim in terms of which prices are set and payment is generally accepted, and the other impersonal claims that are out there, right? Do you have a term that describes kind of the standard impersonal claim that is kind of makes the payment system go? And you know, an analogous question would be like, you know, or just a comment would be like, you know, there's a difference between speaking a language that everyone else speaks and speaking a language that I don't know, maybe your one friend speaks or something like that. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Uh, so the first one is since it's not my definition on money, I'm just adapting it from Simmel. I cannot really say that, okay, well, this makes a distinction about what the standard is. My intuition would be that, well, if you have any type of social system, however large or big there's a lot of work on anthropology here by Selitzer, by Viviana Selitzer, who talks about the special monies. I would say that, and also Hayes talks about this. So it's a special money that operates within this socio-technical world, right? And all different monies operate within some constrained social system. It just happens to be that the dollar, that system is almost the entirety of humanity. But the more interesting here about so it does have to there it has to be allowed to scale up. So that's why I like the claim on a social system. It forces you to think about the social geography on which it's operating. But about the issue of language, I don't know, and perhaps wasn't what you were going for, but the origins of money are as controversial as the origins of language. We don't know. We don't necessarily know what it is. And there's a very fun anecdote that in the French Academy of Languages, they prohibited them to discuss what the origins of language were because they were getting into physical fights. These things, they stir up emotions. When we talk about value, we cannot help but talk about our understanding of how the world should be, our internal metaphysical system, and we all have one. And this is why I think Bitcoin has managed to seduce so many people because it speaks this mythic script, even if it wasn't designed to do so.
Thank you, Alfredo. I think it's a very nice way to conclude. Stop the recording here.